Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Incubator Podcast. I'm your co-host, Darren Boyd.
This is Abir Saran. Welcome, everyone. Today, really excited to be joined by Aakash Shah, founder and CTO of Oak9, a startup focusing in the cloud security space, particularly at addressing IaC vulnerabilities and ensuring compliance of your domain. So, Aakash, welcome to the show here. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, Aakash, before we get started, would love to hear a little bit about yourself and the background. And share a little bit more about Oak9 as well as your emblem in the back.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's see. I've been in the cybersecurity industry for almost 20 years, long enough to cringe at the word cyber. Started off doing research in critical infrastructure security, focused on, then kind of shifted towards trusted computing and tamper-resistant systems. And finally joined the corporate world, worked with a lot of large companies, helping them build security architecture practices. And really at a time over the last decade when more and more of these organizations were transforming, there were massive digital transformations happening. Everyone was moving to cloud, adopting more agile practices, and really, focused in on how security needs to fit into these modern development practices. And spent enough time there where, along with my co-founder and I, we kept kind of running into the same challenges over and over again, where security teams were just struggling to keep up with the velocity and the rate of change that modern development practices were bringing. And, we recognized that there was a technology solution that was missing that, one, helped developers really, help democratize security for developers so that developers could continue to move with the velocity they wanted to without being slowed down by security, and security teams could kind of seamlessly fit into how development teams were operating and provide that guidance and stay in sync with how fast those development teams were moving. So we recognized the need for a technology solution and started building it almost 4 years ago now, and it's been an awesome journey, and that's how Oak9 emerged.
That's awesome. So what does Oak9 actually stand for, Aakash?
Yeah.
Along with your logo in the back, I imagine.
We get that question a lot. So when we were picking a name, it was really important to us to pick something that was easy to remember, rolled off your tongue, but then also signified strength of security, had a connection to cloud. And we really liked the word oak because, oak trees, kind of signifying kind of rigor of security. We liked the idea of, oak trees having such a long life that we were building something that was going to outlast us. And, so the rigor of security, we love the patterns with trees. Our product focuses on kind of design patterns and reference architectures. So that's the oak. And then the 9 comes from cloud 9, the state of bliss. And so we combine them, and you'll notice that this is our UI UX designer that actually built the logo. This is hand carved in wood, but you'll see the 9 leaves in the tree there.
Mm-hmm. That's cool.
The question is it Oakwood?
It is not Oakwood, unfortunately. Yeah, his budget was very limited. We are a startup after all.
Yeah. I guess the other benefit of at least in California, if you attack an oak tree, you're fined. So you are here to stay, and you are protected in that regard. So Aakash, can you walk us a little bit through more specifics on what Oak9 has come to market with initially?
So the problem that I was referring to earlier, right? One of the things that we've seen as today, 10 years ago, right? You had kind of 2 different teams that were delivering software. You had your infrastructure teams, your ops teams, and your dev teams. Today, infrastructure is delivered as code, and really more and more this code is falling under the umbrella of software development teams. And you can deliver infrastructure in an agile manner. And if you look at teams that are following these modern development practices, using infrastructure as code, like Terraform, for example, you're seeing the ability to build applications at such a massive scale, because infrastructure as code really gives you that automation to build repeatable, consistent, modular, version controlled infrastructure deployments. And you're seeing entire application architectures codified in 100,000 lines of infrastructure as code. And when we kind of think about the challenge this presents to security teams, now on a day-to-day basis, on a sprint-to-sprint basis, the application architecture is no longer static. It's changing. And security teams just aren't positioned to engage and look at every single change that these teams are making to the application architecture. And these are foundational changes that need to be assessed from a security standpoint. And so what, the state of the industry is reactionary. We're finding issues after things are deployed. And there's well-known statistics that kind of show that this is 100 times more costly to fix things after the fact than if you were to just bake things in as you were building it. And then that's the problem we wanted to solve. And, so we built a security automation platform that kind of fits into that developer's workflow. And as they're building that architecture in Terraform, we assess that architecture and we provide security feedback on that architecture in a seamless and automated way.
So from that, Aakash, I would surmise really you're truly trying to shift everything left further into the evaluation, and from your product understanding of that you have, you're offering blueprints for both security infrastructure teams to be checking, validating during the build phase. So more of the prevention aspect of things versus where oftentimes was the reactionary stage of detecting further down the chain.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. And what my team is actually working on is we build, well, what our blueprints are for the technical folks that might be familiar with this term, right? They're security reference architectures as code. So we have our own security as code framework that we've built that essentially allows us to build design patterns as code, if you will. And what we're doing is we're taking all of the industry best practices from organizations like Cloud Security Alliance, OWASP, NIST, European best practices, and baking them into these, best practice reference architectures. And as we understand what the application architecture is, we can then, dynamically apply the right reference architecture to that application, assess it, and then provide feedback. And so, from a blueprint standpoint, what we're really doing is building something that gets tailored for each application as the developer is building it so that, they're getting contextual, accessible, actionable, and achievable feedback.
And that's expressed right in the IDE as the developer is going through their development process. Is that correct? And is that a dynamic expression as well? So as I'm entering my line of code and I do my carriage return, is that when it invokes, or do I have to then manually apply it with a Terraform plan or something similar?
Yeah, we have my co-founder Owen, right, has a guiding principle that we operate on as a company: stay out of the developer's way and fit into their workflows. So the idea is to really have that infrastructure developer, never require that infrastructure developer to leave their own workflows, their own tool sets. So within their own tool sets, as they're writing that code, right, we want to give them that seamless guidance, and give them that guidance in terms of, hey, there's a better way to design this that is more secure or maybe meets your compliance requirement a little bit better. Here's some suggestions that we would make, right, to kind of improve the security posture of this particular architecture. And as you're committing code, we're creating PRs for that developer so that, once again, within their existing workflows, right, if you're familiar with the term PRs, it's a GitOps term. We fit right into their Git workflows. And as they commit code, we're basically creating code changes for them that say, hey, here's what I would recommend if you want to do data at rest encryption. Here's 50 to 100 lines of code change to help you do data at rest encryption properly.
So
go ahead.
So one of the things I like about this is we work with a lot of large enterprises, and in many places, these enterprises aren't necessarily enforcing strict standards. And so what we find is, their happy path will be Terraform, and that's developed, and there's like focused teams that are building programs around that. And then of course they say, hey, you can leverage your transpiler of choice, you can leverage Pulumi, Troposphere, whatever you would like to. But our happy path is Terraform. And when you look at Terraform, it's a powerful ecosystem. there's a lot of, like, when we look at IaC as kind of a canvas, we've got your frameworks, and then you've got your testing frameworks, you've got your security frameworks, you've got your policy enforcement engines. And Terraform, the beauty of it is there's lots of different communities that have driven some of those elements, but at the same time, it's very difficult to stitch it all together, right? I may use TerraTest or Terraforma on my testing suite, and then I've got to switch over to, maybe I've got TF-Lint or TerraScan or something else in the security domain. But then to get all of that to work in concert by a developer that is just trying to get work through gets exceptionally difficult. And so, at least from my perspective, Oak 9 is really tying all of that together from a security angle, at least. That makes it, at least if that's your happy path, here's a almost a white glove experience to get that through, so that you don't have to worry about mashing all of this capability together.
Yeah.
So that's my view of it. I don't know if that's something you would reinforce.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the trend that we are big believers in is developer freedom. We hear this from customers day in, day out, right? What we're seeing more and more organizations do is really give those development teams the freedom to select the cloud service provider of their choice, the feature capabilities of their choice, the tech stacks of their choice. They're really driving a lot of these decisions, and development teams are taking ownership of the entire release management lifecycle in these organizations. And so, as kind of developer empowerment is happening, as more and more of these developers have freedom to make these choices, right? Like, what we really latched onto is, hey, we want to build a platform that empowers that developer to continue to have the freedom of choice, right? And still have security be able to fit into their workflows and give them feedback. And so, the way we've built the platform, we're IaC language agnostic. So IaC is just a channel for us to get visibility into what is that application architecture that this developer is trying to build. If we understand their business use case, if we understand their application architecture, now we can give them that contextual feedback back in the language of their choice. So CloudFormation, Terraform, Pulumi, right? It doesn't matter. You're building in the language of your choice. We're going to assess your application architecture and then give you that feedback seamlessly within your own workflows.
I think that's tremendously powerful, Darren, because that term, developer empowerment, developer freedom. So some of the enterprises, clients or customers that we've come across, they actually maybe are more mature in some ways because of all the kind of the lack of tools and technologies available to them originally were very specific. You have to work within these guardrails to ensure that we are going to be compliant. So developers were somewhat handicapped. Now, in the face of the overall cloud evolution and movement, we're going towards self-service because developers want that freedom. They want not to be encumbered. So when you talk about self-service, and within the IDE, as you're talking about, getting real-time feedback as they're developing code is tremendously powerful because they don't feel restrictive. They don't want to deal with a lot of other organizations, organizational entities, and operate within that tools. But then also from the efficiency side of things as well, right? Yeah. Is if you're getting it right there versus checks and balances coming out later. So that's just my 2 cents of it. Do I have that all right? I mean,
so one of the things I want to build on that is, again, some of these large enterprises, they've put a lot of work into, hey, how do I make this easier for my constituents to consume? As we've all said, that some of these languages are DSLs. They're domain specific. It's yet another thing for someone to learn. And so this one helps in that conversation. But the other piece is, they've spent a lot of time on these adoption, or I'll call it like product lifecycle management for this product that they've brought to market. Let's call it IaC. And they spend some time on developer advocacy. And in that space, whether it's a wiki, whether it's something else, they'll put sample code. They'll put some guides. They'll put maybe some new programs they want to launch. And the hope is that drives enablement, which then goes back to the developer experience. So they're doing things to try and meet the developer where they're working, which hopefully drives engagement. And then they build communities around that internally, which drives awareness back to those advocacy programs. That's the aspirational goal. But where it gets very complicated is trying to stitch together some of those helpful guides and some of those code snippets, et cetera. What I like about Oak 9, and if I have this right, it's not only expressing things in the IDE, some of your design gap documentation is something that can really help the developers understand when they're working with API Gateway, when they're working with Service X. You have very helpful documentation in context that can help guide the experience, period. And then as I'm coding, you can help and ensure that what I'm coding is, compliant based on the framework, based on whatever other determinant, which makes it not only a guided experience, but it really enforces or reinforces this advocacy that people are concerned with. And what I find further, the last part I promise, is if someone sells a product, a vendor sells a product, what often happens is they're always almost confused or surprised or disappointed with the uptick. And so that vendor will throw like office hours, and that vendor will throw a TAM, and that vendor will throw resources at it to hope that the enterprise picks it up, but it doesn't necessarily correlate. But if you can build these programs organically by giving information in context when I need it, as I need it, I find that beyond anything else drives adoption. And I'm wondering if that's something you also experience, see, and agree with.
It's one of the things that we look at very deeply at Oak9, and this was something, if I look back 5 years ago when we started the company, every single organization that I worked with, especially the large enterprises, they had 1,000 security tools, all throwing alerts. And, the issue wasn't identifying security issues, right? The issue was remediating those issues. And, you were kind of constantly building 6-month, 1-year roadmaps to go back and address kind of all of the security debt that you've collected over the past several years. And, we took that lesson to heart, and, we really wanted to focus on not just finding the issues, but how can we help this developer fix it? And so one of the things that we think about at Oak9 a lot is really, how do we incentivize this developer to go that last mile and actually fix the issue? Because we're not making an impact on this organization until we can get that developer to actually fix the issue. And so we think a lot about kind of the psychology, right, aspect of this, and how can we kind of, continue to make life easier and easier for this developer so that it's just click a button, here's a fix, right, for what you're working on, and giving them exactly what you're talking about. Don't overwhelm that developer. Give them the information that they need to fix the problem at hand. And once they remediate that, give them the information they need to fix the next problem, and make it easier for them. So as an example, the kinds of things that we focus on is really when we create these PRs for that developer, how can we make it bite-sized? How can we make it focused on exactly what they need to solve? And give them, if all of the changes we want to make are in code, if we can explain to this developer why this is important, what is the issue, how do you need to fix it? So here's kind of the changes that we want you to make. Here's where we're making the changes. It makes life so much easier for that developer. They understand in context. If, as a developer, I understand the requirements of my application. I might not understand the best way to do data at rest encryption and set up a key management service and make sure the lifecycle of the keys being managed appropriately. But I understand that, hey, encryption is important for this application that has potential data that falls under HIPAA, as an example. I'm going to agree that, yes, this is a requirement I want to meet. And if I can trust the changes that our platform is providing, then they're more likely to accept that change. They're more likely to, and fundamentally what we're able to do is, as we can incentivize developers to accept our changes, we can transform these application architectures through automation and make them more secure and compliant. And that's the end goal, right? To really have an impact on what these organizations and help them really improve their security posture.
We're going to battle this one out.
So that leads me to one question though. So you're using the word incentivize, which I really like. That's you're showing that you understand the developer and you're trying to, I guess, build toward a better experience for all. But how do you balance that with the needs of the organization? Because one option you do have is to partner with enforcement technologies to say, we told you thou shalt not, you're still not, you don't get to ignore this, and now we're going to take a more escalated path. Is that something that you is there a design philosophy around how you want to handle that? Is that something that you're considering? Where do you go with some of that? Because we do love the way you've embodied and understand and empathize with how the developer operates. But there's also, the person that pays the bills sometimes is the organization, and they have another mandate as well. How do you balance that? And are you doing anything in that regard?
Yeah, our design philosophy here is to really provide flexibility to the organization to really build policies the way they see fit. And so as an example, with our customers today, we are giving the information in terms of the types of issues we're finding, how critical they are, and given the context of that application, we're dynamically deciding, hey, this is the most critical issue you have right now with this application because I understand your business use case, I understand your application architecture. If you have 100 issue and you can only spend time on fixing 5 issues, here's the 5 most important things that you need to deal with. But at the end of the day, we're giving that organization the flexibility to decide, for example, whether or not they want to allow that to be promoted from their dev environment to their test environment. And so they can configure, our philosophy here is, we fit into that pipeline. We let you configure how that pipeline works entirely. So you can configure a pipeline to fail on critical issues so that critical issues don't end up in your test environment from dev. Or maybe you're okay with critical issues in your test environment, but you want to prevent them from going into production. And so you have complete freedom and autonomy as an organization to really configure the policies around your pipeline and how you want to control where gaps are addressed as applications are promoted across your environments. And so our philosophy is really one of give the developers and the security engineers freedom to kind of make their own independent, autonomous choices. And the organizations are going to decide what's best for them.
So, Darren, can I ask now? Is that okay with you? Okay. No, appreciate that, Aakash. So, on the latitude or flexibility for developers to decide, which policies are to be enforced and everything like that, or which maybe rules to be enforced and what to move on or forward with. So you've taken the best of the compliance frameworks out there and along with best practices, put them into your blueprints. Is this also these blueprints continuously evolving? Are you learning off of your client base and others to figure out emerging trends or best practices, not only to be compliant, but just to improve processes on your blueprints that, certain firms or certain customers of yours might be saying, okay, this works, but because we fall into this domain, we're going to ignore this one, or hey, we'd really like to add this in. So how's that feedback loop and evolution of the blueprints taking place?
Yeah. One of the things we do is we hold a lot of workshops with our customer base, and we have a pretty diverse customer base across different industries, right? So healthcare, finance, supply chain companies, manufacturing. And so when we're looking at our customer base and we're having these workshops, one of the things, the conversations that we're having with these customers are really around what are your use cases? What kinds of architectural patterns do you need to follow, right? So a medical devices company that's building medical devices and managing medical devices across hospitals is using some of the same core technology components like the IoT hub in Azure, as an example, right, to manage these devices. And we have a manufacturing company that's managing their kind of manufacturing IoT devices using the same technology. Their use cases are completely different. Their needs are different. Their security requirements are different. The regulatory landscape under which they operate is different. And so, learning from their use cases, we've kind of created that feedback loop just in terms of, holding these workshops, understanding their use cases, and then feeding that back into our blueprints. The other kind of feedback loop we have is really across, AWS, Azure, GCP, as they're releasing their best practices. We are lockstep with them. We're understanding where they're taking kind of security and what best practices they're recommending for their native capabilities. And we're baking those in from a feedback loop standpoint. And then lastly, you kind of mentioned, right, we have this kind of unique perch where we see the patterns and the reference architectures that different companies are adopting. Mm-hmm. And so we're able to then, kind of take higher level learnings from that, without really getting visibility into any one customer's, reference architecture because that may be their intellectual property, but really understanding like broadly what are the patterns that we're seeing across the financial industry. And as a new customer comes in, right, we can now provide that insight back to them to say, hey, look, other companies in the financial sector, they're all using bring your own key architectures for key management. And, for these types of applications, and are you sure, like you don't want to follow the same pattern, right? Like your peers, your others in the industry have kind of adopted this pattern and it's pretty common versus, if we were to talk to a supply chain company, maybe that's not the right architectural pattern for them. And so we can kind of tailor and provide feedback on an industry by industry basis.
Great. I wanted to build on that too. So it's a similar question, but when you're talking to folks, when you're talking to potential prospects, I'm curious what is right now at least predominantly driving the conversation. Is it more, hey, our feature release cadence is fairly low relative to our bug fix? Is it more, hey, we're catching a lot on post scan? Is it more an acknowledgement that it's lost productivity or engineering cycles? What do you find is the most predominant conversation right now that is driving the use of Oak 9 at this point?
Yeah, I would say all of the above is definitely what we see across customers. But I think if you were asking me the most predominant use case, it's really, we're seeing just an explosion in adoption of infrastructure as code. And we're seeing security teams that are recognizing that they have this massive gap of visibility. And what they're kind of realizing is that there is tons and tons of changes that are happening in their organization that they are just not plugged into. They're not providing guidance. And then they're recognizing the root cause of some of the friction that they have with their developers is they're finding these issues after the fact. And now, it's that like awkward conversation that every security person, knows they need to have with that development team. Is like, okay, I know you have other priorities for this next sprint, but I found a bunch of issues. You're going to need to drop those priorities and start fixing security bugs. And, like as a security architect, like it's not an easy conversation to have. In large organizations, these kinds of things then get escalated, more people get involved, right? And it's never a fun conversation. But if you can target that developer early and, kind of work with them and collaborate with them more effectively, right? I think most security organizations are recognizing that that's the way they want to operate. They'd rather avoid these awkward conversations. So I would say like the most predominant use case we're seeing is definitely just the explosion of IaC and security teams recognizing that there's a gap in visibility.
Yeah, it's interesting. I imagine the security engineers are loving this too because they are historically understaffed. They have so much going on as well. I know, of course, the developer as well. There's a tension that naturally exists between those. But there's also maybe you could take a little bit of time on this. We know that Oak 9 has experienced massive growth, right? And I forget the numbers from Gartner, but they talked about the IaC space and some predictions, which were phenomenal numbers. I can't state those right now, but I think you've over quadrupled your workforce. Revenue has been on a beautiful uptick. Can you talk to us a little bit about just the company itself, its growth, what you're experiencing, maybe what sectors or verticals are helping to drive that, a little bit of your go-to-market, because that is pretty phenomenal growth. And congrats, by the way.
Thank you. Yeah, it's been quite the journey. So, we really commercialized the company and over the pandemic. And, we started fundraising over the pandemic. Like we've gone through this entire journey over the pandemic. We hired a team of over 20 people that we never met in person for almost a year. Wow. It was such a weird experience to then finally have a team gathering once we were all vaccinated, like, have a team gathering and see people in person. And, you get to see like, oh, I thought all this time, I thought you were so much taller than you are, right? Or you're so much shorter than I expected. Like, it's like one of the first things you notice, right? Like you've talked to this person, you recognize their mannerisms are so much different in person than they are on Zoom. And so that was just an incredible experience to like meet everyone in person. But for us, that journey's just been, as we released the product late last year, we're just seeing, we really honed in on building the product the first few years and just making sure that we had a rock solid product. And when we released the product last year, the reception has been great. We're getting some really, really good customer feedback, and love the trajectory that we're on, and excited for what's to come this year.
Yeah. Well, building on that, Aakash, so what is the trajectory? Where is Oak9 going? So there's been great reception to the product and everything like that in the marketplace. Where do you see the evolution happening from a product roadmap perspective?
Yeah, so there's kind of, I would say, two major things, right, that we're working on right now that we're incredibly excited about. So one is our security as code. So to date, right, for the last 2.5, 3 years, it's been my team that's been building these blueprints. And we have a team of security architects and engineers that have really built this catalog of security reference architectures as code. And our framework is at a really good point where we're now excited to kind of open it up to our customers. And then the idea is, once we open it up to our customers, and we'll collect some feedback from our customer base, if there's interest, right, we'd love to open source it and open it up to the world. And so that's one of the major initiatives that we're working on right now. I would say the next initiative that's really related to that is, if you think about what we're doing in our platform, we get an understanding of your application architecture. So we create this massive graph of your entire application architecture and your environment. And our security as code has a nice clean interface to interact with that application architecture, to ask questions of that application architecture, assess security properties of that architecture. And now, we can propose changes to that architecture and translate that back to the IaC language of your choice. And so kind of the other major piece that we're working on is that, really getting that, the remediation that we're doing today and the PRs that we're creating, right? Getting that to that next level of developer friendliness where it's so seamless for that developer. It takes into account all of the context around what that developer is doing. We call that like intelligent remediation. So the idea is like, the more we understand about what the developer's business use case is, what their application architecture is, what they're actually trying to do, the more we can hone in on giving that contextual, accessible feedback to them. And once again, kind of incentivizing them, right? If the feedback is easy to understand, if the feedback really, kind of makes it clear to them what changes we're proposing, then that developer is going to accept our changes. And when they accept our changes, right, we're going to have a broader impact at that organization. And so those are kind of the two major things that we're super excited about.
Yeah, I just love your focus on the developer experience and the developer freedom, the developer empowerment. I think that's where a lot of the focus is for Oak9, and that's where I think a lot of the need is in the market. So it's really great to see that focus.
So I guess one additional question I would have is just going back to who is primarily making the purchase. If this is a security-led initiative, again, it comes back to that tension. Is this something that I'm then pushing down to the developer, which I imagine it's well received, but when we look at interactions between groups, folks can I can tell you to use this thing and I can mandate it. I can sell you on the idea that this is going to make it better for you. I can consult with you. We can have agreements. There's lots of ways for us to partner and get something in the door together. But I am curious who is your primary buyer, at least at this stage?
Yeah, it's, what we're learning is it really depends on the organization, and it depends on, I would say, two major factors, right? Like their security maturity. So we work with a lot of large companies. We work with a lot of, Series C, Series D, Series E startups. And what we're finding, is with larger organizations that have well-established security teams that have a security budget, really the buyer ends up being security. With startups that are still, investing in their security practice, they just hired a CISO, and that CISO is just building out the team. The buyer tends to be the CTO or the developer organization. And so it kind of varies based on their security maturity. But one of the things that's consistent across all of our customer interactions is if we start talking to security, immediately the next conversation is with the development teams. And if we start with the development teams, the next conversation is with security, and our third conversation, which is where we kind of, figure out how long we want to trial the product, the criteria around the trial. Like that conversation involves both the development and the security team. And so, we immediately see that collaboration, and both teams kind of coming to the table, understanding the value that each of them are going to get by using our platform. So, just kind of thinking about operating in a more modern way. And so for us, it's kind of targeting both, but the buyer tends to be different based on the sizes of the company and the security maturity of the organization.
Yeah, I'm thinking of one company that we have as a customer, and there may be a third persona in that, which is in this case they have a product owner for IaC, and they're the ones kind of responsible for building this advocacy program we discussed earlier, and they may also be an interested person to potentially introduce something like Oak9 into their customer, which is the developer, and then of course the security team that they partner closely with. So that might be an interesting conversation for us.
Yeah. Yeah, one of the things that that reminds me of is if you look at the kind of the latest State of the DevOps report, one of the things they talk about, right, is, if you kind of think of developer freedom and complete developer freedom as kind of one extreme, right? They talk about, building platforms, and that's seems to be the kind of the model that you're referring to, right? Is really more and more kind of larger organizations want to standardize a little bit, and so they're kind of centralizing these teams. They're building platforms that then the rest of the organization can leverage all of the learnings and the knowledge, right? That institutional knowledge that they've built around these platforms. And so, we're seeing that model also be very successful across a lot of large organizations.
Yeah, and that's what I was alluding to earlier. Same customer example is, they were early to the game in rolling out IaC frameworks and everything like that within the organization. So they needed to centralize to grapple with kind of driving the adoption and things of that nature. So potentially was restricting at the time, but now it's a dialogue to say, hey, what is the right balance with the developer side of the equation? And that's where I think this could be a very interesting play. But all that said, really excited about Oak9's potential, Aakash. Thank you so much for sharing with us your product, your platform, and the company. We're looking forward to working with yourself and others at Oak9. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I do want to.
You're not allowed.
Yeah, I do want to add that we have Oak9 in our lab running successfully, and so if anybody wants to have more information, if they want to see how the product works, etc., please reach out to Sabir and myself. We'll be happy to give you a demonstration as well.
Thank you so much, Aakash. Thank you, everyone, for listening.